Hi, I'm Thomas Hicken, and this is my presentation of research, which is titled The Player's Morality. So throughout these next few slides, I'll be showing a condensed version of my argument essay, along with all my findings that went along with it. So essentially what I did when working on my research topic is I delved into morally decision-based games and their effect on gamers as a whole. Um, so basically exploring like moral philosophy in the gaming community, if that makes sense. And I found this pretty fitting because I'm a computer science major, so yep, this topic was pretty fun. All right, so slide two. Research question and intro. My research question being, are the moral philosophies in video games affecting gamers' sense of good and evil? So when I went about researching this question, I tried to look at the gaming industry when it first started and where it is now. I delved into the oldest examples of morally decision-based games and their current equivalents. As you can see in my second paragraph, when William Higginbotham decided to create the very first video game in 1958, it was but a simple Pong-like tennis game. There was no story, no choices, just a simple game of trying to get a ball past your opponent. No one would have guessed that the nature of video games would change so drastically in such a short amount of time. Yeah, so what this means is obviously that the very first video game didn't involve any morally based questions in the slightest. But as time went on, you tend to see a trend, or at least I tended to see a trend in text-based games, which obviously had stories, and with those stories had morals, and then which inevitably developed into some of the games we have today. Like for example, the Mass Effect series, or the Fallout series, or like any Telltale game for that matter. Yeah, but that's about it. All right, slide three: argument and thesis. So my thesis is just right there. I'll just go ahead and read it. So just as a moral philosophy existed in games long before William Higginbotham created the very first video game, it was only a matter of time before the video game designers would integrate the topic of morality, showing how gamers as a whole would be sensing the idea of good and evil for the rest of the time. So yeah, that's kind of my overall argument in one sense, I guess. Being that I'm trying to convince the reader that when people play games, their morals by the end of those games are changed to a certain extent, and that's given those games are impactful enough. Whether or not the game is good or bad, it also depends on the person as well. There's a lot of moving parts and stuff, but I'll get more into that later. All right, so slide four: reasoning and evidence. So moral choice in video games, written by Daniel Schaefer. So he's quoting actually someone else. So Schaefer is quoting Sicard here. He states, or I guess she states, if players enter a game world having left all morality behind, then moral concerns make no difference and in-game actions are meaningless. But if players enter into a game as moral beings, as ethical agents, then what they do in the game is meaningful. So yeah, I really like this quote right here because it strengthens my argument quite a bit because what it's saying is that when people enter video games, when they play them, they take their morals and their perception of good and evil with them when they go into the game. And what that means is that, or what I take it as, is there's like a pretty good chance that when they leave the game, at the end of the game when they finish it, their morals and their perception of good and evil might change, or there's a pretty good chance of it changing at least. Now, as to whether or not the scale of the change varies, obviously, their morals could change slightly, or it could change quite a bit, depending on the game, how good of a game it was. There's a lot of moving parts, as I said. But yeah, I really like this quote. If you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend checking out this article. It's pretty good. So attribution, more articles, all the stuff I used in my essay. Once again, if you're interested in my topic, I highly recommend going and checking out these sources. Pretty interesting. Yep. And now my conclusion. All right. So here's my conclusion. I'll just go ahead and read it out. So on average, most gamers who complete games that involve numerous decisions that are affected by consequences later introduced seem to apply what they see and learn, or what they learn and see, seeking to improve themselves not only as gamers but as human beings. So yeah, what I'm saying here is that on average, most people who finish games that involve like decisions that are affected by consequences later introduced in the game, decisions that are affected by morals. On average, those people who finish those games are going to have their morals and perception of good and evil changed by the end of them. Mm, yeah, so the best I could do is come up with a rough estimate as whether or not I could really find out the overall change of gamers as a whole. Uh, but yeah, that's about it, honestly.